Hello and welcome back. It's definitely been a hot minute since my last upload. Sorry, things have been a little hectic. My hydrangea bush is blooming outrageously, which means that it's pretty late in the summer. So yeah, it's been a few months. We're definitely going through some things. And you may have heard someone say, or you may have said, this affects me even more deeply because I'm an empath. And I'm going to tell you that, for those of us in the woo-woo community, we're going to need to try really hard not to let those words fall out of our mouths, especially right now. And I'm going to give you two good reasons. Reason number one is because it takes something as enormous as a global pandemic and it makes it about me. It takes an abysmal response to a global pandemic and looking out your window and seeing your neighbors value going to the beach over people's lives. And it takes all of that chaos and it makes it about my feelings. So that's reason number one, to not say this affects me more deeply because I'm an empath, because I think it makes the whole woo-woo community look like fools. And if I think I'm somehow helping the situation by sharing this, then I should learn to juggle because I am a clown. Reason number two, why I shouldn't say this affects me more deeply because I'm an empath, and that is going to be a little bit more controversial, and that is that we're probably not empaths. In fact, it's really debatable if there's really such a thing as an empath at all. So before we can unpack all of that, we probably need to define what an empath is. And as with all beliefs, there are going to be as many definitions of an empath as there are people who identify as being an empath. But just for the sake of keeping this simple, I did find a definition online that I felt like most of us can agree on. It's actually in an article by Susan Ruffo, and the article was titled, "Please Don't Call Yourself an Empath." And the quote is, "Being an empath is being affected by other people's energies and being attuned to their inner lives. It means that you feel and want to respond to suffering." So it definitely talks about like trading energies with people. And then those energies may, energize you or they may bring you down. It's like feeling this like emotional connection with other people. So let's unpack that. And we're going to start with my favorite word in the woo-woo community, and that would be energies. Now, in the scientific term, we talk about energies as just the ability of matter to do work. And clearly that's not what we're talking about here. That it sounds like it's being pulled from something scientific, but it actually doesn't really have any relation to science at all. It's actually a metaphor that we use to define something that's just really difficult for us to define. So if we're going to define what it means to be an empath, that means we are going to have to figure out what this metaphor means when we say that we gain energies from other people or that they have energies that move to us. Like I said, it's a belief, so there's going to be countless definitions, so it's really impossible for me to know when somebody's using that metaphor of energies. It's impossible to know what they really intended to mean. So it could have something to do with noticeable changes in a person's body. It could be that that person's really attuned to reading facial expressions, to reading body language. There's a lot of human communication that's sort of under the surface that if you're distracted, you may be completely oblivious to. But if you're really in tune with somebody, you may be able to pick up on the underlying conversation that's beneath the surface. And we're talking about things like voice patterns, I've read articles about being tuned into someone's pupils dilating, but this is all something that we view through our own experiences because all communication is sort of done through our experiences. So if somebody has a very specific body language and we pick up on that to mean a specific emotion, that's because that's how we interpret that emotion, because it's communication is sort of messy because we bring our own assumptions into it. And there's layers to experiencing someone else's emotions. So at a surface level, if you just feel sorry for somebody, then we usually refer to that as sympathy, which is, a nice thing to have, but it's like the very base level of experiencing somebody else's emotions. So if we connect with that person's emotions through our own personal experiences to where we can really come very close to feeling them in the same way, that is empathy. And so I think that's where the term empath sort of comes from, is experiencing people in this always in this empathy state. And, you know, when you reflect on your interactions with other people, you might think, I'm constantly in this state of empathy when I'm responding to other people, so therefore I must be an empath. You may have identified as that way. You also may not like to be in large crowds. You might find solace in nature. You might be drained when you hear about the pain and sadness of others. This all sounds familiar, so when you first probably heard about there was such a thing as an empath, then you do a quick Google search and you find the 17 traits of an empath. Are you an empath? Things that only empaths will understand. And it might begin to look a lot like something from a personality test. And so that's when I think that we can really step back and put our skeptical hat on and think about our interactions with people. Does anyone experience empathy in place of sympathy with every interaction that they have? No, probably not. So why do we feel that we are always having these really deep connections? I think it leads back to something that we call confirmation bias. Okay, so let's put a pin in that really quick and let's think about some other ways that you might describe yourself. Besides calling yourself an empath, you might also describe yourself through like your features on your horoscope. And it doesn't take deep skeptical review to uncover exactly how astrology works. You can actually do a test to find out exactly how it works. You can find all of this week's horoscopes and cut them all out and just slice the name of the horoscope off the top, and then get your friends together and scramble them up and see if you can figure out whose horoscope is whose, just based on the information without having the prompt of knowing which sign it is. And I bet you won't be able to. My personal favorite is from professional skeptic James Ramsey. What he does is he takes a classroom full of participants and he passes out a letter to all of them, and he has them open the letter, and then he tells them that this letter contains an extremely personal horoscope that was compiled from birth charts and like where you grew up and all of this very personal information, and it will be very enlightening to your personality and your traits. So all the students sit and quietly read this letter, and then at the end he asks like, how closely do you identify with the things written in this letter? Like how correct was this on a scale of 1 to 5? And everybody, like some people say 4, but most of the group says 5. Like this is me, spot on. And so then he has them pass the letter to the next person, and then they start to read it, and then, you know, there's chuckling because they realize that he has given everyone the exact same horoscope. So if something is true for everyone, then it's really true for no one. Like the old skeptical saying when you talk about like alternative medicines that cure cancer and heart disease and, you know, like this whole list of things. And the school of thought is that if it cures everything, then it cures nothing. So how does this happen? Why do horoscopes feel like they personally align with us? This is also confirmation bias. What is confirmation bias? Well, in this instance, it's when you focus on the information that fits or that is correct, and you gloss over the information that doesn't connect. So if you have a bias, so that bias is maybe that, like what my astrology sign is. So when I read information about my astrology sign and it fits me, then that confirms my bias. So I remember it and it sticks with me and I pay attention to it. And in the same passage, if there's information that doesn't fit the bill and it doesn't confirm the bias, then I just read right over it like it wasn't even there. On top of that, most horoscopes are written in a sort of universal way. So if I mix up horoscopes and you draw them out of a hat and you read them, chances are you would be able to connect with several parts, no matter who it was written for. So what are some other pitfalls that we run into in this sort of framework of confirmation bias? Also personality tests. There's a really popular personality grouping right now that is the introvert-extrovert grouping, and I don't even have to explain to you what that means because you are probably all familiar with this because it's everywhere and you can't escape it right now. And at first I thought it was really clever and fun, and it was really eye-opening. But now I think it's started to get into just being ridiculous, and I'm kind of tired of it, and I kind of never want to see it again. Like seriously, I've just said the words introvert, extrovert, and you're already like thinking in your head which you identify as, and you're thinking about attributes to both and friends that you have and whether they're extroverts or introverts or ambiverts. And you might be also thinking about your Myers-Briggs alignment, and let me tell you, like, that is just such junk science. Like, it's good for fun, but please don't make any decisions based off of these things. So let's go back to that introvert-extrovert thing. Okay, so if you are an extrovert, you gain energy from being around groups of people, and if you're an introvert, you gain energy from being by yourself, like the sort of battery charging thing. But humans don't have batteries. Energy is the ability of matter to do work. And neither of those things align with personality, so what are we trying to say? It's a metaphor. So if you're talking about social interactions, like, what does energy mean? Like, humans don't have batteries, so what does the battery mean? What is the metaphor standing in place of? What's the concept that we're having a hard time defining? Does it mean to be more focused? Does it mean like literal tiredness? Is it something that's different depending on who you ask? And honestly, could it be really hard to explain because it's just not a thing and we need to just stop forcing it to be a thing? Of course, everybody has a limit when they're socializing, and it's really important to have a balance between personal boundaries and social time. The amount of boundaries that you need and the amount of socializing that you need, like, that just depends on when or who or why. Like, that's constantly in flux. So then why do we let ourselves be pigeonholed into this very strict definition of what our social needs are? So let's apply that same confirmation bias to this introvert-extrovert paradigm. Okay, let's say I've identified Wanda as being an introvert, or maybe she self-identifies that way. Maybe Wanda had a lot going on, and so she had to call and cancel plans with you. And I might think, gosh, she is such an introvert. But then later, maybe she invites coworkers out to drink, and I'll say, gosh, that's not like her. Usually she's an introvert. So this is just a special anomaly. So I'm gonna think that she's an introvert even though I have contradictory information. So I think that's an example of how people get stuck in these boxes. And honestly, it's not just about confirmation bias. You can push this all the way into a self-fulfilling prophecy, which means that you read up on the personality you identify as, and then you make your decisions based on that definition of your personality. So if you're an introvert, you may cancel plans too often, and you might not get the social interaction that you need. If you identify as an extrovert, maybe you're gonna push other people's boundaries and like think, oh, well, I'm an extrovert, so it's okay. We can also fall into the pit of stereotype threat. This means that we will flat out avoid behavior just because it goes against the traits that we were prescribed. So for example, there was a study done where a whole group was given a test. And before the beginning of the test, they were told that women tend to score lower on this particular test. And guess what happened? The women scored lower on that particular test. They re-administered the test, and at the beginning, everyone was told that women and men scored about the same on this particular test. And guess what happened? Men and women scored about the same on the test. So the purpose of personality tests, astrology, that sort of thing should be entertainment, because you really don't want to lock yourself into those prescribed traits. Instead, we really need to be flexible to be able to change our behavior depending on the who, the what, and the where. Okay, so this brings me all the way back to labeling myself an empath. Okay, so let's look at it through the lens of confirmation bias. That means when I'm interacting with somebody and I'm really connecting with them deeply and I'm feeling that empathy, that confirms my bias that I am an empath. So that's the moments that I'm really going to remember, and I'm going to think about this. However, all of my other interactions with people where I'm not attuned with them, then I'm not going to remember it as being evidence towards my bias. Which makes sense, because being oblivious, like, how could you consciously think about what that means? Like, you're being oblivious. And, you know, we spend a lot of our days being slightly oblivious. So that means if I only remember the moments when I feel really connected to somebody, then I'm going to feel that I'm experiencing empathy most of the time. And experiencing empathy a lot of the time would feel like a superpower, because it's not really sustainable and it's just not how most people function. And really, if there was a way for you to keep track of when you were feeling empathy and when you weren't feeling empathy, and you were able to look at it, I would hedge bets that you experience empathy at an average rate that would be similar to other people that are like you. We should absolutely all work to be more empathetic, of course. And we should also work to have personal boundaries, because personal boundaries are really important to our mental health. So I think it's really important that we don't get really wrapped up in trying to feel special and labeling ourselves as an empath, because that just encourages behavior to reach this bias instead of the behavior that's appropriate and good for you in the moment. And I think that's why it's really important not to define yourself into a box. So yes, be empathetic. Yes, follow your astrology and have fun with it, of course. Yes, take all the personality tests. Just make sure that these outside influences aren't pushing you into a box, because you need to be flexible to change and grow and to interact in a situation like however is appropriate and not what you feel that you've been prescribed. Hopefully that wasn't too controversial. If you identify as an empath and at the end of this video you still feel that you are very much an empath, like that's a beautiful thing. Like, definitely don't let me rain on your parade. That's not my intention. It's just that the crew here is very skeptical, and I just think that's a very healthy way to interact with the world around you, is to constantly ask questions and be reflective, and instead of just jumping on like the next big thing. I had been kind of putting off making this video because I felt like it was kind of a crummy time to make a like negative crummy video. So I hope this did not come off as being negative and crummy, because that is not the content I want to make. I just want to critically reflect on the world around me and not be critical of other people. Like, that's not my goal. I don't know what my next video is going to be about. I don't know. Hopefully it doesn't take me this long, but yeah. Thank you everybody for sticking around. I was waiting very patiently to have a particular number of subscribers on my YouTube channel, and it was going to be so epic, and I waited very carefully to get a screenshot of it, and I failed. But now I have this many subscribers, which I think is also kind of something to celebrate. So I don't know if I think of a good way to celebrate that. I definitely will. But thank you all for coming around and having these conversations. Hopefully I see more interesting things being chatted about on Reddit. Oh, and I'm gonna attach my outfit on the end of this video, because the most cool thing about this outfit is the skirt, which you can't see right now, and I think that's such a travesty. So I'm gonna give you a full body picture of my EGL coordinate in case anyone's interested, because I had a tea party today. It was on Zoom. I'm not a plague rat, so I should definitely end this video, but we will see you next time.